As Tommy lay face down on the hot asphalt with Officer Johnson's knee pressed into his back, he tried to process what was happening. The handcuffs were cutting into his wrists, and he could taste dust and grit from the road. Mrs. Peterson's sprinklers had just turned on, and he could hear the rhythmic sound of water hitting her garden. Such a normal, peaceful sound in the middle of what felt like a nightmare. "Officer, please listen to me," Tommy said, his voice muffled against the pavement. "I'm telling you the truth. I'm active duty military. My commanding officer's number is in my phone. Just call him and this whole thing will be cleared up in 2 minutes." Officer Johnson wasn't interested in phone calls. In his 15 years on the force, he'd heard every excuse in the book. Suspects always had someone who could vouch for them, always had some reason why they couldn't possibly be guilty. But Johnson had learned not to trust anyone until he had all the facts. "Save it for the judge," Johnson replied, pulling Tommy to his feet. "You can make your phone calls when we get to the station." What neither officer knew was that Tommy wasn't just any soldier. He wasn't even just any staff sergeant. Tommy was part of a specialized military intelligence unit that handled sensitive operations. His security clearance was so high that most people at the base didn't even know what his real job was. When people asked, he just told them he worked in communications. The truth was much more complicated. Tommy's unit dealt with information that could affect national security. They tracked threats, analyzed intelligence, and sometimes coordinated with other agencies on operations that never made the news. It wasn't glamorous work. Mostly it involved sitting at computers and reading reports. But it was important work that required absolute reliability and precision. Because of the sensitive nature of his job, Tommy was required to check in with his unit at specific times, even on weekends. He had a GPS tracker built into his motorcycle that his supervisors could monitor, and he carried a special phone that could locate him anywhere in the country. These weren't spy movie gadgets. They were just basic security measures to keep track of personnel who had access to classified information. Tommy's next check-in was scheduled for 4:30 p.m. It was now 4:15, and he was handcuffed in the back of a police car instead of on his way back to base. In exactly 15 minutes, when he failed to respond to the automated check-in system, alarms would start going off at Fort Campbell. Officer Martinez finished examining Tommy's motorcycle and walked over to where Johnson was putting Tommy in the back seat of their patrol car. "No damage that I can see," Martinez reported. "But that doesn't mean anything. Maybe he hit something soft, or maybe he got it fixed real quick." "Could be," Johnson agreed. "We'll let the detectives sort it out back at the station." As the patrol car pulled away from Mrs. Peterson's house, Tommy looked out the window and saw neighbors starting to come outside. Word travels fast in small towns, and people were curious about why there had been police cars on their quiet street. He spotted Mrs. Chen from down the block talking to Mr. Williams over their shared fence, both of them looking concerned. Tommy closed his eyes and tried to think. His sister Lisa was probably wondering why he hadn't texted her that he'd made it back to base safely like he always did. His nephew Jake was probably still talking about the motorcycle, asking his mom when Uncle Tommy would visit again. None of them had any idea that their Sunday afternoon visit had led to this mess. At Fort Campbell, things were about to get very interesting. At exactly 4:30 p.m., Tommy's name appeared on a red screen in the security monitoring center. The automated system had tried to ping his location device and hadn't received the expected response. This wasn't unusual. Sometimes soldiers were in areas with poor cell reception, or their devices malfunctioned. But protocol was protocol. Sergeant First Class Katie Rodriguez was monitoring the system that afternoon. She'd known Tommy for 2 years, ever since he'd been assigned to their unit. He was one of the most reliable soldiers she'd ever worked with. If Tommy wasn't responding to check-ins, there was usually a good reason. Katie tried calling Tommy's phone. It went straight to voicemail. She tried the backup number. Same thing. That was when she started to worry. Tommy always answered his phone, especially on check-in days. She pulled up Tommy's GPS tracking information on her computer. The last known location showed him stationary on Elm Street in Cedar Falls. That was unusual. Tommy should have been moving, heading back toward the base. Why would he be stopped in one place for so long? Katie decided to follow procedure. She picked up her secure phone and dialed Captain Dave Mitchell, Tommy's commanding officer. Mitchell was at home, grilling burgers in his backyard while his kids played on their swing set. When his secure phone rang, he knew it wasn't good news. "What's the situation, Rodriguez?" Mitchell answered. "Sir, we have a missed check-in. Staff Sergeant Blake. His GPS shows him stationary in Cedar Falls for the past 20 minutes, and he's not responding to phone calls." Mitchell's relaxed Sunday afternoon mood disappeared instantly. Tommy Blake was one of his best soldiers, and more importantly, he had access to information that couldn't fall into the wrong hands. If something had happened to Tommy, it wasn't just a personal crisis, it was a potential security issue. "Pull up his full tracking data," Mitchell ordered, walking into his house and away from his family. "I want to know everywhere he's been today and exactly where he is right now." "Already. On it, sir." According to GPS, he visited his sister's house on Maple Street around 1 p.m. He left there at 4:10 p.m. and made it about 6 blocks before stopping on Elm Street. He's been in the same spot ever since. Mitchell's mind was racing. There were several possibilities. Tommy could have had mechanical problems with his motorcycle. He could have been in an accident, or in the worst-case scenario, he could have been taken by someone who wanted the information in his head. "Rodriguez, I want you to contact local law enforcement in Cedar Falls immediately. Ask them if they have any reports of accidents or incidents involving a motorcycle on Elm Street, and get me a full security team ready to deploy. If Blake has been compromised, we need to move fast." Back in the police car, Tommy was starting to realize just how serious this situation was becoming. Officer Johnson was on his radio, talking to dispatch about bringing in a suspect for questioning. Officer Martinez was following in a second patrol car, with Tommy's motorcycle loaded onto a trailer behind it. "Unit 23, we're en route with the suspect," Johnson was saying into his radio. "ETA, about 10 minutes. We'll need an interview room. Set up and contact Detective Williams. Tell him we might have his hit-and-run suspect." Tommy wanted to speak up, to explain that this was all a mistake, but he knew it wouldn't help. These officers had made up their minds. They thought they had their man, and nothing he said was going to change that until they were forced to listen to the evidence. What Tommy didn't know was that across town, the real hit-and-run suspect was at that very moment getting pulled over by a different set of officers. The actual perpetrator was riding a motorcycle that looked similar to Tommy's, but it had obvious damage from the collision. He also didn't have military identification, a spotless service record, or a commanding officer who was about to mobilize half the base to find him. The clock on the dashboard of the police car read 4:45 p.m. Tommy had now been missing from his check-in for 15 minutes, and at Fort Campbell, people were starting to make phone calls that would change everything. The Sunday afternoon sun was beating down on the quiet streets of Cedar Falls as Staff Sergeant Tommy Blake cruised his black Harley-Davidson down Main Street. The rumble of his bike's engine was the only sound breaking the peaceful silence of the small town. Tommy had just finished a wonderful lunch with his sister's family, and now he was heading back to Fort Campbell, about an hour's drive away. Tommy loved these weekend visits. Being stationed at the base meant he didn't get to see his family as much as he'd like, so every Sunday dinner with his sister Lisa and her kids was precious to him. The kids always got excited when Uncle Tommy showed up on his motorcycle, and today was no different. His nephew Jake had spent the entire afternoon asking questions about the bike, wanting to know everything from how fast it could go to when he'd be old enough to ride one himself. As Tommy rode through the peaceful neighborhood streets, he was thinking about how lucky he was. After 3 tours overseas, being back home in a quiet place like Cedar Falls felt like a blessing. The tree-lined streets, the white picket fences, the kids playing in their front yards. It was everything he had fought to protect during his time in combat zones. But his peaceful ride was about to take an unexpected turn. Tommy first noticed the police car in his rearview mirror about 2 blocks from his sister's house. At first, he didn't think much of it. Police officers patrolled these neighborhoods regularly, especially on weekends when families were out and about. But when he made a right turn onto Elm Street and the patrol car followed, making the same turn, he started to pay attention. The EA, Flashing red and blue lights came on just as Tommy was approaching the intersection of Elm and Oak Street. His heart sank a little. He'd been driving carefully, staying within the speed limit, and he couldn't think of any reason why he'd be getting pulled over. Maybe his registration was expired, or perhaps there was something wrong with his taillight. Tommy pulled his Harley over to the side of the road right in front of Mrs. Peterson's house. He'd known Mrs. Peterson since he was a kid. She used to give him and his friends cookies when they'd walk by her house on their way to school. Now she was probably watching from her window, wondering why there was a police car in front of her house. As Tommy shut off his engine and put down his kickstand, he noticed that not one but two officers were getting out of the patrol car. That seemed like a lot for a simple traffic stop, but Tommy remained calm. He'd dealt with military police plenty of times during his service, and he knew the best approach was always to be respectful and cooperative. The first officer, a tall man with graying hair and a serious expression, approached Tommy's bike. His nameplate read Officer Johnson. The second officer, younger and stockier, positioned himself slightly behind and to the side. His nameplate said Officer Martinez. "Good afternoon, sir," Officer Johnson said, his voice professional but stern. "I'm going to need you to step away from the motorcycle and keep your hands where I can see them." Tommy was surprised by the formal tone. This didn't sound like a routine traffic stop. "Of course, officer," he replied, slowly getting off his bike and raising his hand slightly to show he wasn't holding anything. "Is there a problem?" "We've received reports of a motorcycle matching your description involved in a hit-and-run incident about 30 minutes ago," Officer Johnson explained. "The suspect fled the scene after colliding with a parked car on the other side of town." Tommy's eyes widened. A hit-and-run? He'd been at his sister's house for the past 3 hours, and before that, he'd been at the base. There was no way he could have been involved in any accident. "Officer, I think there's been a mistake," Tommy said, keeping his voice calm and respectful. "I've been visiting my sister's family all afternoon. I just left their house about 5 minutes ago. You can call them if you'd like. They'll confirm I was there." Officer Martinez stepped forward. "Sir, we're going to need to see some identification and we'll need to inspect your motorcycle for any signs of damage." "Absolutely," Tommy said. "My ID is in my wallet, in my back pocket. I'm also active duty military, stationed at Fort Campbell. My military ID is there too, if that helps." But as Tommy reached slowly toward his back pocket to retrieve his wallet, Officer Johnson's demeanor suddenly changed. "Stop right there," he shouted. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Tommy immediately froze, his hand halfway to his pocket. "Officer, I'm just reaching for my wallet like you asked." "I said keep your hands visible," Officer Johnson repeated, his hand moving toward his service weapon. "Step away from the motorcycle and put your hands on your head." Tommy couldn't believe what was happening. He'd been completely cooperative, and now he was being treated like a dangerous criminal. But his military training kicked in. He knew that the situation could escalate quickly if he didn't follow orders exactly. "Yes, sir," Tommy said, interlacing his fingers behind his head. "I'm cooperating fully. I just want to show you my identification to clear this up." Officer Martinez moved around to examine Tommy's motorcycle, while Officer Johnson kept his eyes fixed on Tommy. "I don't see any obvious damage to the bike," Martinez called out. "No dents, scratches, or paint transfer." "That's because I wasn't in any accident," Tommy said. "Officer, if you'll just let me show you my military ID, you can call my commanding officer. This is all a misunderstanding." But Officer Johnson wasn't listening. He was focused on what he perceived as a potentially dangerous situation. In his mind, he had a suspect who matched the description of someone who had fled the scene of a crime. The fact that Tommy was being cooperative didn't change that. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Johnson ordered. Tommy's heart was racing now. This was going from bad to worse. "Officer, please, I'm active duty military. I'm stationed right here at Fort Campbell. I have security clearance. If you'll just let me show you my ID." "I said turn around," Johnson shouted. Tommy turned around slowly, his hands still raised. He could hear Officer Martinez calling something in on his radio. probably requesting backup. This simple misunderstanding was turning into something much bigger, and Tommy was starting to worry about how it would end. As Officer Johnson approached with handcuffs, Tommy made one more attempt to explain. "Officer, I'm Staff Sergeant Tommy Blake, stationed at Fort Campbell. I'm assigned to a special unit there. If you'll just call the base, they can verify everything I'm telling you." But it was too late. Johnson had already made up his mind. The handcuffs clicked shut around Tommy's wrists, and suddenly he found himself face down on the asphalt, the rough pavement scraping against his cheek. "You have the right to remain silent," Officer Johnson began, reading Tommy his rights while pressing his knee into Tommy's back. Tommy closed his eyes and tried to stay calm. He'd been in much worse situations during his deployments overseas, but this felt different. This was supposed to be home. This was supposed to be safe. And now he was lying on the ground in handcuffs in front of Mrs. Peterson's house, being arrested for something he didn't do. What Tommy didn't know was that his detention was about to trigger a series of events that would turn this quiet Sunday afternoon into something nobody in Cedar Falls would ever forget. 23 minutes had passed since Tommy was first handcuffed on Elm Street. He was now sitting in an interview room at the Cedar Falls Police Department, still in handcuffs, staring at a gray concrete wall. The room smelled like stale coffee and cleaning supplies. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the metal table where his hands were cuffed to a chain around his waist. Detective Ray Williams had just walked in with a thick folder and a cup of coffee. Williams was a veteran detective about 50 years old, with the tired look of someone who'd seen too many suspects lie to his face over the years. He sat down across from Tommy and opened the folder with a dramatic flourish. "So, Tommy Blake," Williams said, reading from the file. "Staff Sergeant Tommy Blake, according to the ID we found in your wallet. Pretty convenient story about being in the military, don't you think?" "It's not a story, Detective," Tommy replied, trying to keep his voice calm. "It's the truth. I'm stationed at Fort Campbell. My commanding officer is Captain Dave Mitchell. If you call him right now, he'll verify everything I'm telling you." Williams leaned back in his chair and studied Tommy's face. "You know what I find interesting? The hit and run happened at 3:45 p.m. You were pulled over at 4:15 p.m. That's exactly enough time to get from the accident scene to where we found you." "I wasn't at any accident scene," Tommy said, his frustration starting to show. "I was at my sister's house on Maple Street. Lisa Blake. She lives at 234 Maple Street with her husband Mike and their 2 kids. Call them. They'll tell you I was there from 1 p.m. until about 4:10. People lie for family members all the time." Williams shrugged. "Especially for military heroes like yourself." Meanwhile, at Fort Campbell, Captain Dave Mitchell was pacing back and forth in the Security Operations Center like a caged tiger. The room was buzzing with activity. Multiple computer screens showed maps, tracking data, and communication logs. Sergeant Rodriguez was on 3 different phones at once, trying to coordinate with local authorities. "Sir, I've got Cedar Falls PD on line 2, Rodriguez called out. "They're saying they don't have any reports of accidents involving motorcycles, but they did just bring in a suspect for questioning on an unrelated hit-and-run case." Mitchell grabbed the phone. "This is Captain Mitchell, Fort Campbell. We have a missing soldier whose GPS tracker shows him in your area. Staff Sergeant Tommy Blake riding a black Harley Davidson. Have you seen him?" The desk sergeant on the other end of the line paused. "Well, Captain, that's interesting. We do have a Tommy Blake here. Brought him in about an hour ago. But he's not missing. He's under arrest for hit and run." Mitchell felt his blood pressure spike. "Under arrest for what? That's impossible. Blake is one of my most reliable soldiers. There's got to be some mistake." "Well, sir, I can't discuss an ongoing investigation, but if you want to talk to Detective Williams, I can transfer you." "Transfer me now," Mitchell said, his voice sharp, with authority. While Mitchell was being transferred, he was also making another call on his secure line. He dialed the direct number for Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base's security commander. Hayes had 30 years of military experience and had dealt with situations like this before, though usually they involved soldiers being kidnapped or attacked, not arrested by local police. "Colonel Hayes," she answered. "Ma'am, we have a code, orange situation. Blake is being held by local police on false charges. His security clearance is compromised and he's missed 2 check-ins now. Hayes didn't hesitate. Mobilize a security team. Full deployment. I want 50 soldiers ready to move in 10 minutes. If Blake is being held illegally, we're going to get him back. Back at the police station, Detective Williams was still questioning Tommy when his phone rang. "Williams," he answered, sounding annoyed at the interruption. "Detective, this is Captain Mitchell from Fort Campbell. I understand you're holding one of my soldiers." "Captain, I appreciate your concern for your soldier, but this man is suspected of fleeing the scene of an accident. Military or not, he's got to answer for what he's done." "Detective, I can guarantee you that Staff Sergeant Blake was not involved in any hit and run. He's been under GPS monitoring all day as part of our security protocols. I can provide you with a complete timeline of his movements." Williams looked across the table at Tommy, who was nodding eagerly. "GPS monitoring? What kind of unit is this guy in?" "I can't discuss that over an open line, Detective, but I can tell you that Blake has top-secret security clearance, and his detention is creating a significant security issue. I'm requesting his immediate release into military custody." "Well, Captain, I appreciate your position, but we have evidence that suggests your soldier was involved in a crime. Until we complete our investigation, he stays here." "Then I'm coming down there with my people to sort this out in person," Mitchell said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded troops in combat zones. Williams hung up the phone and looked at Tommy with new eyes. Top secret clearance? GPS monitoring? This was starting to sound like something much bigger than a simple hit-and-run case. "Your captain seems pretty concerned about you," Williams said. "He should be," Tommy replied. "I told you, I'm not just any soldier. I work in a specialized unit. My arrest is probably triggering all kinds of security protocols right now." 3 miles away from the police station, the parking lot at Fort Campbell was filling with military vehicles. Humvees, transport trucks, and communications equipment were being loaded with supplies and personnel. Soldiers in full combat gear were checking weapons and radios. To anyone watching, it looked like preparation for a major military operation. "Captain," Mitchell climbed into the lead Humvee, wearing his dress uniform instead of combat gear. This wasn't a military assault. It was a diplomatic mission with overwhelming backup. He was accompanied by Major Lisa Chen, the base's legal officer, and Master Sergeant Tom Johnson, the security team leader. "How many men are we bringing?" Mitchell asked Johnson. 50 soldiers and 12 vehicles, sir. Full security detail, but weapons are secured unless you give specific orders. We don't want to escalate this into something it doesn't need to be." "Good. The goal is to get Blake back safely and avoid an international incident with local law enforcement. But I want them to understand that we take care of our own." The convoy pulled out of Fort Campbell at exactly 5:15 p.m. 12 military vehicles moving in formation down Highway 41 toward Cedar Falls was not something you saw every day. Civilian drivers pulled over to let them pass, some taking pictures with their phones. Others called friends and family to report what looked like a military emergency response. Back at the police station, the real hit-and-run suspect had just been brought in by officers Kelly and Thompson. His name was Danny Rodriguez, and unlike Tommy, his motorcycle showed obvious signs of collision damage. Paint scraped down one side, a cracked mirror, and a dented fender that clearly matched the damage to the parked car he'd hit. "Found him, trying to get his bike repaired at Mickey's garage," Officer Kelly reported to the desk sergeant. "The mechanic got suspicious when he saw the damage and called it in." "So we got our guy?" the desk sergeant asked. "Yeah, this is definitely our hit-and-run suspect. He even confessed when we showed him the evidence." The desk sergeant looked toward the interview room where Detective Williams was still questioning Tommy. "So what about the other guy?" "What other guy?" "The military guy Williams has been grilling for the past hour." Officer Kelly frowned. "We brought in the wrong person?" At that exact moment, the first rumble of heavy engines could be heard outside the police station. The desk sergeant walked to the window and his jaw dropped. Coming down Main Street was a convoy of military vehicles that looked like something out of a war movie. Humvees with mounted communications equipment, transport trucks full of soldiers, and official military flags flying from radio antennas. Detective Williams," the desk sergeant called into the interview room. You might want to come see this. Williams walked out of the interview room, leaving Tommy alone for the first time in over an hour. Through the small window in the door, Tommy could hear voices getting excited in the main area of the police station. Holy cow, look at all those soldiers. Are we under attack or something? Why are they stopping here? Tommy smiled for the first time since this whole nightmare began. He recognized the sound of those engines. He'd ridden in those same Humvees dozens of times during training exercises. Captain Mitchell had kept his promise. He was coming to get his soldier back. Outside, 12 military vehicles were pulling into the police station parking lot in perfect formation. 50 soldiers in dress uniforms were climbing out, forming organized ranks under the command of their officers. And leading them all was Captain Mitchell, walking toward the front door of the Cedar Falls Police Department with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a soldier and didn't plan to start today. The front door of the Cedar Falls Police Department opened with a purpose that made everyone in the building stop what they were doing. Captain Dave Mitchell walked in first, his polished boots clicking against the linoleum floor. Behind him came Major Lisa Chen, carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it contained important documents. The entire police station fell silent as these two military officers approached the front desk. "Good evening," Captain Mitchell said to the desk sergeant, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "I'm Captain Mitchell from Fort Campbell. I believe you're holding one of my soldiers, Staff Sergeant Tommy Blake. I'm here to discuss his immediate release." The desk sergeant, a 20-year veteran of the force named Bob Wilson, had never dealt with anything like this before. Sure, he'd had angry parents come in to bail out their kids, and he'd dealt with lawyers demanding to see their clients. But he'd never had a military captain show up with what looked like half an army parked outside. Captain, you'll need to speak with Detective Williams," Wilson stammered. "He's handling the case." Detective Williams appeared from the back hallway looking frazzled. He'd just spent the last few minutes trying to figure out how they'd ended up with two different suspects for the same crime. The real hit-and-run driver was now in custody, which meant the military guy in the interview room was probably telling the truth. "Captain Mitchell?" Williams asked, extending his hand. "I'm Detective Williams. We spoke on the phone." "Detective," Mitchell replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. This is Major Chen, our base legal officer. We're here to resolve what appears to be a case of mistaken identity." "About that," Williams said, looking embarrassed. "We may have made an error. We just brought in another suspect who appears to be the actual perpetrator of the hit and run." Major Chen opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Captain, before we proceed, I think it's important that Detective Williams understands exactly who we're dealing with here." She handed Williams a document with an official military seal at the top. "This is Staff Sergeant Blake's service record. As you can see, he served 3 combat tours in Afghanistan, received a Bronze Star for valor, and has been decorated for exceptional service multiple times." Williams scanned the document, his eyes widening as he read. 3 tours? Bronze Star? This guy's a real hero. "He is," Mitchell confirmed. "But more importantly for your situation, Detective, Blake currently holds a top-secret security clearance and works in military intelligence. His detention here has triggered security protocols that go all the way up to Pentagon level." "Pentagon level?" Williams repeated, the color draining from his face. Major Chen pulled out another document. "This is Blake's current assignment status. He's part of a classified unit that deals with sensitive national security information. When he failed to check in at his scheduled time, automatic alerts were sent to multiple agencies including the FBI, NSA, and Department of Defense." Detective Williams sat down heavily in a nearby chair. "Are you telling me that arresting this guy has created some kind of national security incident?" "I'm telling you that Staff Sergeant Blake's disappearance from our monitoring system has triggered responses from agencies that don't usually get involved in local police matters," Mitchell explained. "The good news is that we've located him. The concerning news is that he's been in civilian custody for over 2 hours without proper notification of his security status." Outside, the citizens of Cedar Falls were gathering to watch the military convoy. Mrs. Peterson, in whose front yard Tommy had been arrested, was standing with her neighbors trying to figure out what was happening. Word had spread quickly through the small town that something big was going on at the police station. "I saw them arrest that young man on his motorcycle right in front of my house," Mrs. Peterson was telling anyone who would listen. "He seemed like such a nice boy. Very polite. I can't believe all this is about him." Back inside the police station, Detective Williams was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. "So when you say Pentagon level, you mean—" "I mean that there are people in Washington, D.C. who are currently asking questions about why one of our intelligence personnel is missing," Major Chen said matter-of-factly. "Questions that we need to be able to answer very soon." Williams rubbed his forehead. "Look, Captain Major, I understand the seriousness of this situation. But we had a hit-and-run incident and your soldier matched the description of the suspect. We were just doing our job." "I understand that, Detective," Mitchell replied. "And I'm not here to criticize your department for following proper procedures. But I am here to clarify that Staff Sergeant Blake was never involved in any hit-and-run incident. We have GPS tracking data that shows his exact location at the time of the accident." Major Chen pulled out a tablet computer and showed Williams a detailed map with a red dot marking Tommy's location. At 3:45 p.m., when the hit-and-run occurred on the south side of town, Blake was here, at his sister's house on Maple Street, approximately 4 miles away. "You track all your soldiers like this?" Williams asked. "Only those with high security clearances," Mitchell explained. "It's a safety measure, not surveillance. Blake's job requires him to have access to information that could be dangerous in the wrong hands." Williams was starting to piece together just how badly this situation had been mishandled. "So he really is telling the truth about everything?" "Detective Tommy Blake is one of the most honest, reliable soldiers I've ever commanded," Mitchell said. "If he told you he was visiting his sister, then that's exactly what he was doing. If he told you he works in military intelligence, then that's his actual job. And if he told you that his detention would cause problems, well—" Mitchell gestured toward the window where the military vehicles were visible outside. At that moment, Officer Kelly approached the group. "Detective Williams? I hate to interrupt, but we've got the real hit-and-run suspect ready for processing. His name is Danny Rodriguez, and he's confessed to the whole thing. His motorcycle has damage that matches the scene perfectly." Williams closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "So we definitely have the wrong guy in the interview room." "It appears so," Kelly confirmed. Major Chen looked at her watch. "Captain, Blake has now missed 3 scheduled check-ins. We're approaching the point where this becomes a formal security incident that will require reports to multiple agencies." "How many agencies are we talking about?" Williams asked nervously. "FBI, NSA, Department of Defense, and possibly Homeland Security," Chen replied. "Anytime a person with Blake's clearance level goes missing for more than 4 hours, it triggers automatic investigations." Williams stood up quickly. "Let me get him released right now. This has gone on long enough." As they walked toward the interview room, Captain Mitchell explained more about Tommy's situation. "Detective, I want you to understand something. Blake isn't just any soldier. He's been handpicked for his current assignment because of his integrity, intelligence, and reliability. The military doesn't give top-secret clearances to people who run from accidents or cause trouble." "What exactly does he do?" Williams asked. "I can't go into specifics," Mitchell replied, "but I can tell you that his work helps keep this country safe. He analyzes threats, processes intelligence, and helps coordinate responses to potential security issues. It's not glamorous work, but it's vital work." They reached the interview room where Tommy had been sitting alone for the past 20 minutes. Through the small window, they could see him sitting calmly, his hand still cuffed to the chain around his waist. Despite everything he'd been through, he maintained his military bearing. "He's been extremely cooperative throughout this whole ordeal," Williams admitted. "Never raised his voice, never got hostile, just kept insisting he was innocent and asking us to call his commanding officer." "That's Blake," Mitchell said with a slight smile. "Even under pressure, he follows protocol and respects authority. That's exactly why he was chosen for his current position." Detective Williams unlocked the interview room door. Tommy looked up as they entered, and his face immediately brightened when he saw Captain Mitchell. "Captain," Tommy said, relief evident in his voice. "Sir, I've been trying to tell them that this is all a mistake." I know, Blake, Mitchell replied. We're here to get you out of here. Detective Williams has some things he'd like to say to you. Williams approached Tommy with the key to his handcuffs. Staff Sergeant Blake, on behalf of the Cedar Falls Police Department, I want to apologize. We've made a serious error, and we're releasing you immediately. We've arrested the actual hit-and-run suspect, and all charges against you are being dropped. As the handcuffs came off, Tommy rubbed his wrists where the metal had been cutting into his skin. Thank you, Detective. I understand you were just doing your job. Blake, Captain Mitchell said, I need you to know that your detention has created some complications. We're going to need to debrief you and file reports about this incident. Yes, sir, Tommy replied. I understand. Major Chen stepped forward. Staff Sergeant, we'll also need to arrange for medical evaluation and counseling services if you need them. Being detained under these circumstances can be traumatic. Tommy stood up and straightened his civilian clothes.